Hello, folks, and welcome to Understanding Immigration. Here with me, I got Spencer Raley. He's going to be talking to us about a new study that just came out from FAIR about a month ago, talking about limited English proficiency students in the public school system. Spencer, you want to take it away? Tell us a little bit about the study you did.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be back on the podcast. I feel like it's been a while.
I got a little bit of an upgrade here in the studio.
Absolutely. It's feeling very professional in here. So yeah, we released a study here recently looking titled "The Elephant in the Classroom," and basically it's an update of a report that we did it's been almost 6 years now, and what it looks at is the impact of mass immigration on our public school systems, particularly when you look at the number of students that don't have full English proficiency, also known as limited English proficiency, or LEP. As you read the study, you'll see that term over and over again. And not just the numbers, where they're at, et cetera, but also the costs that go along with it, performance metrics, and some of the social impacts as well. The report, we found that there are approximately 5.1 million LEP students in American public schools, which is an increase from 6 years ago, that are costing Americans approximately $78 billion, excuse me. And that's an
very
increase of, very, very important distinction. That's an increase of $18.8 billion since 2016. So massive numbers. Things aren't getting any better. This is the data primarily that we're working with goes up until the 2020 school year, so middle of 2020, which is telling because since most of that data runs 1 to 2 years behind, it doesn't include everything from the Biden border crisis that's going on right now. So we know that this is not in any way, shape, or form an overshot or an overestimate of the facts. It's low, actually. Things are getting worse, and they're only going to get worse until the federal government takes the immigration crisis we're dealing with seriously. Yeah,
and another study that I think you had a hand in compiling also recently said we had, it was 4.9 million then, but it's probably around 5 million now border crossings we've had since Biden took office.
Yeah, and at least 2 million of those have been freely released in the United States, and we estimate that costs $20 billion. So if you kind of do the extrapolation of how many of those individuals are school aged, how many of them are going into the public education system, you're talking thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of additional LEP students entering our schools on top of what we have in our report here, which is really alarming because what we found was that schools were already getting really close to their breaking point, which means now who knows how many of them are, have crossed the Rubicon to where it's going to be almost impossible to repair the damage.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So, LEP, we talked a little bit about the term, limited English proficient. When we're coming to this term, is this strictly illegal migrants, children? Is this people who are, limited English proficiency, but their parents are still citizens? What does that look like?
Right. It's a combination of all those things. We found that a majority of them are either illegal aliens themselves or the children of illegal aliens. So the students may actually be U.S. citizens because they were born in the United States, which gives them citizenship essentially no matter what, even if their parents are illegal aliens. Also included in that, pretty much the balance, the rest, would be the children of lawful migrants. In some very rare instances, it's a couple of generations down. You see that an individual may have migrated to the United States. They didn't teach their children English, so they speak Spanish or another language at home, and then they teach their children the language that was their heritage as well, which really just it makes assimilation a problem. Obviously, it puts a strain on school resources, but for the most part, what we found is this is rooted from mass migration, particularly of those who are coming to the United States that obviously don't speak English, family-based migration, that sort of thing. Less than 2%, closer to 1% of the totals are actually U.S. citizens who are not recent migrants.
You said less than 1%.
Approximately 1% are not from migrant families. It's just individuals who, sometimes it's as simple as like their family was Amish or something and they spoke Pennsylvania Dutch or something at home and they never appropriately learned English, or they come from a culture where they just didn't learn English appropriately and now they're having to basically be taught it in school. But that's That's like the exception of the exception.
Yeah, so-
99% of this is rooted in mass immigration. Individuals coming to the country that don't know the language, illegal aliens crossing the border, and which is kind of a shame because that means it's largely an issue that could be remedied. And with the majority of it being rooted from illegal immigration means that states, cities, they cannot plan for this. You can't say, hey, we're budgeting for 2,000 additional illegal aliens next year. It's just not something that you can plan for.
Especially these days under this administration, it's hard to kind of plan that out.
Right. I mean, a couple of years ago when President Biden took office, I would say us at FAIR knew that things were going to get bad. But even us, with all of our expertise, everything that we were able to anticipate, did not know it was going to be this bad. Yeah. So, no one at a school level could have prepared for this. You couldn't go into a board meeting or a budget meeting or, into the state house and say, hey, here is the $10 million extra dollars I need over the next 5 years to educate illegal aliens. Because, again, you can't project that kind of growth.
And even if you did, your numbers would probably be wrong at the end because we couldn't have anticipated the amount of people who are coming to the country.
Again, if you would have planned it based on the average number of illegal aliens coming into the country each year in, say, 2018, it would have gone down a little bit during COVID, and it would have gone through the roof now. So again, there's no reason to even try to make any kind of projection. It's one of the reasons I don't like to make those little charts that project how many illegal aliens might be in the United States in 5 or 10 years, because we're pretty certain the number is going to keep going up unless we begin to get a handle on our immigration system and take the issue seriously. But there's just no way to really accurately project it. Almost all these numbers are reactive. We look at what the Census Bureau's American Community Survey said last year, and we tell you what the population is at any given moment over the last year. It's just not something you can plan for, and that's one of the reasons this is so destructive to schools.
Yeah, of course, and I can completely understand that. And I mean, when we're not able to plan out these funds and these funds are going out, it's looking at things like music programs getting cut, art programs getting cut, all of those. Is this, I'm not sure if the study covered this completely, but, how is this compared to other school programs? This is costing the states as a whole billions, but is this comparable to like the football team that the school's going to have? What are we looking at here?
Well, we found that it costs approximately 20% more on average to educate a student that has limited English proficiency. Now, in schools with lower student totals, it's actually a lot more because you have to hire bilingual teachers. You have to make sure you have the facilities for it. So if you've got a school with 100,000 students in it, and then you have 1,000 students that are LEP, just for example, or maybe more, maybe less than that, it's a little easier for larger school districts to absorb that than it is for smaller school districts. So it ends up being rounding out to about 20%. Now, what we found, and we've talked a lot about being unable to plan for this, is that currently there is a need for about 76,000 LEP qualified teachers. And that's not including the roughly 100,000 teachers that are not properly certified to teach LEP students but are doing so anyway. So yeah, you're talking about how does this impact or how does this compare to other programs? I don't know of many schools that are lacking 15 football coaches or that, just have that kind of shortage in terms of teachers. And there is a teacher shortage across the country, but it is largely fueled by our inability to properly plan out what is going to be needed in the coming years. We can plan for things like how many new students might be in our schools the next year based on birth rates, how many preschoolers do we have right now, what is the average inflow of people coming to the country or to the school district from other parts of the country, or even averaging out legal immigration in the United States. You just can't do that for illegal immigration, where they're going to end up. And in today's day and age, when is President Biden going to do a night flight and dump 1,000 illegal aliens into your city? It just can't be planned. And so really it's getting to a point where it's dwarfing all of the other issues, and there are many issues that public schools are dealing with right now, but it's really starting to dwarf that, and it's starting to have an impact on performance metrics as well.
Yeah, I could definitely believe that. Instead of the teacher shortage, we have a specialized teacher shortage.
Right,
so,
right.
Hey, any of those job seekers out there, make sure you're taking notes on this one here. So, with all that going down, I mean, this is just some astronomical numbers that we're looking at and some astronomical costs to schools. Do we see this focusing more, is this an all 50 states problem, or are we saying, Texas is really bearing the brunt of this, California's bearing the brunt of this? What does the study say?
Well, obviously, states along the border, states that have a higher immigrant population, a higher illegal immigrant population are going to see higher figures. Texas, California, a few other states, New York. Now this is costing more than $1 billion a year.
Wow.
But even states where you wouldn't think this is as big of an issue, such as the Dakotas or Montana or Maine, you're talking about a price tag in the tens and even hundreds of millions of dollars. And again, that's because, and we've said it time and time again here at FAIR, every state has become a border state. This isn't just something that's impacting Laredo or McAllen in Texas or Tucson, Arizona, or Phoenix or San Diego. Illegal aliens are going everywhere in the United States, wherever there are economic opportunities. And so it's become an issue in all of these states. In fact, one of the cities, we looked at a few kind of case studies in the report. One of the cities we looked at was Indianapolis. And we saw that the illegal alien, or the LEP population in their schools over the last decade or so has grown almost fourfold.
Wow.
It's grown at an alarming rate because more and more illegal aliens, as they see that, hey, ICE isn't going to deport me. The federal government isn't really taking their job seriously. They did somewhat during the Trump administration, but they certainly aren't now. That makes them feel emboldened to actually move around the country freely. And, of course, we're seeing it even more concentrated in areas where illegal aliens can get driver's licenses, where benefits are available. So, obviously, California, Illinois, New York, states like that are very accommodating to illegal aliens are bearing the brunt of this. Taxpayers there are paying, in some instances, more than $1 billion a year for these programs, born almost solely out of the irresponsible immigration programs that we are administrating in the United States today.
Yeah. And I mean, this has to be taking an overall fault on education. The fact that we have to focus on making sure that we're educating kids in English before we're educating them in reading, before we're educating them in math, anything along those lines. Has there been a hit in the overall sort of education levels of United States students because of this entire impact?
Well, absolutely. There's actually been a new term invented over the last 15 years. I think the acronym of it is LTEL, Long-Term English Learners.
Wow.
Because when you have so many students that don't speak the language at an acceptable level entering the school system, and you don't have enough teachers to properly teach them English, how can you expect them to learn English? And if you can't speak English properly, how are you going to learn the other subjects in school? So what we found is less than 5% of 12th grade LEP students gain acceptable proficiency by state standards in either math or English. It's not just an English issue. They don't learn to speak English. They're not finding success in math. They're not finding success in social studies and all the other topics as well. So essentially what we're doing with an irresponsible immigration system is we're setting these students up, these children up for a lifetime of failure, because if they are able to even get a degree in their hand, they weren't getting the quality of education that they needed, and they aren't really having any opportunity beyond that because they're not learning these subjects that are so vital and so important to succeed in America today. Also very concerning, we learned in this study in our reporting that this is starting to impact non-LEP students as well. The children of migrants who came here the right way, who learned English, who insisted their children speak English at home and learn the language. It's also impacting native-born Americans. People have been here for generations because these schools have to take resources that are needed in those programs and divert them to educating the children of immigrants who don't speak the language. Everyone ends up suffering. And it's really problematic because so many people talk about these illegal aliens, migrants, everyone, they just want to come here and work. But when you don't have a responsible immigration system, it ends up being the people who have no say in this whatsoever. Children can't vote. They can't go to a town hall meeting and ask questions. It ends up hurting them the most, and we're setting them up for a lifetime of difficulty because our education systems are starting to struggle under the weight of these astronomical costs, the burdens, the lack of teachers, the lack of facilities even in some instances, and it's only getting worse.
Yeah, and struggling under all that weight, I mean, do we think that some of these schools are eventually going to fold? It's going to, this small town school in North Dakota, they're spending all this money on making sure they have LEP professionals, everything along those lines. Do we get to the point where this cost is so astronomical they just have to shut down?
At this point, I think what you're seeing more of is an increase in property taxes in states where schools are funded by property taxes, other taxes in order to pay for education. things like that, which is, again, damaging in a time when inflation is increasing at, all-time rates. We're in the middle of a recession. There are still individuals looking for full gainful employment after COVID-19. This is not a great time to suddenly be able to say, hey, we need to take more of your hard-earned money as Americans in order to fund portions of our education born out of our irresponsible immigration policies. And this is really interesting because you're seeing, more and more parents showing up at the polls out of concern for their children's education, their children's future. If education wasn't on the ballot, Glenn Youngkin probably wouldn't be governor in Virginia. We're starting to see that in other parts of the country as well. We're seeing protests with so many of the concerns that are going on in the schools. This is another one of those issues. This is another one of those issues that are really concerning parents because they care about their children more than they care about anything. And so they want to see them find success. So whether you're a legal immigrant who came here the right way or someone that's lived here for generations, when we have an irresponsible immigration system that's just letting people flood across our southern border, when we aren't putting the appropriate checks even on illegal immigration, it doesn't just harm our pocketbooks now, it cripples the future of our very society because our children aren't finding the success that they deserve in our public education systems.
Yeah. No, I mean, you could definitely tell just through, whether it's, all the costs that are associated, whether it's through not being able to learn, all those things. Is there a way we're going to be able to turn this around? Because it kind of seems like, we're past the breaking point with spending. We're past the breaking point where it's starting to hurt the education of people who would have originally been in the school system already.
Right.
I mean, what do we see here? Is there any remedy other than, building the wall, or what do you see?
Well, this really started becoming a problem when a Supreme Court case was decided called Plyler v. Doe, which essentially ruled that the children of illegal aliens and the children of migrants who may not speak English properly deserved state-funded education. Now, I don't think anyone wants to advocate for kicking children out of schools. We want to see all children have an opportunity for success. But for individuals who have just come to the United States who haven't contributed much in taxes, and we found that illegal aliens in general are a net burden to taxpayers, it really cripples school districts when they can't, quite frankly, charge tuition for these children to come and attend school in their districts. So overturning Plyler v. Doe would be a huge ask, something that's probably not going to happen in its entirety. But you could see parts of these mandates overturned. You could see states being able to potentially even sue the federal government, showing that they have standing due to the economic and social burden that's placed on schools by illegal immigration, to be able to tell the federal government that if you are going to saddle us with this unfunded mandate, you need to start shelling out part of the cost. You need to start helping us out with some of this, or you need to allow us to charge some form of tuition, find some way to actually require that illegal alien families actually bear some of this burden. Because at this point, already the federal government contributes approximately 10% of the costs that go to the public school systems. They only contribute about 1.2% of the cost that goes to these LEP programs, despite it being a federal mandate that schools fund these programs. So that's one angle of it.
It's a federal mandate by the amount of people that are coming in.
Exactly, and that's only getting worse. So the other thing is obviously getting a handle on the illegal immigration issues that we have at the southern border, whether that's building the wall, probably even more importantly at this point is actually enforcing our immigration laws. Not just cutting loose every illegal alien that can get across the border. We need to, be detaining and removing immigration lawbreakers. We need, things like mandatory E-Verify would play a huge role here because it'll take away the incentive for illegal aliens to come to the country in the first place. Like I mentioned with Plyler, removing that would take away an incentive to come to the United States. Making sure that other state benefits, if states want to take this seriously and get involved in the fight, where they can, would be to make sure that illegal aliens aren't getting driver's licenses, state benefits, in-state tuition at colleges, things like that. All these would deter illegal aliens from settling in their state, but it would also free up the coffers, the state coffers, to be able to redirect more money towards schools in the first place. So those are two major things that would really help. And honestly, the third point, one that we've seen proposed that Congress could act on, and it'd be really great to see if the Republicans take back at least the House this fall, would be to reintroduce the RAISE Act, because one of the important things the RAISE Act required were that potential migrants be able to show some fluency in English. And if the parents, while this may not require the children to be able to fluently speak English, if parents fluently speak English, more often than not, the children are going to have an understanding as well. And if that becomes a primary language, then these students aren't going to be lingering in LEP programs for the duration of their time in the public school system in the United States. So there are a lot of solutions for this, and I think that's sometimes what really kind of is almost maddening here is it's not like we're just beating the drum on a problem that you can't easily, really fix. This is something that a lot of damage has been done, but we can turn the ship around. We can start to see improvement in some of these areas. It's just going to take some action from Congress. And even though we know Congress is in deadlock and it's very unlikely that many immigration measures will even be passed if Republicans win back the House and Senate, unless there's a landslide and they somehow got 60 Senate votes, which is pretty much an impossibility, you would still have the President of the United States for at least the next 2 years would be Joe Biden, who has shown no interest in any kind of responsible immigration policy. But even with all of that, states can take action. There are good conservative states out there who take the immigration topic seriously that have a lot of room for improvement. Things like removing in-state tuition, making sure illegal aliens can't get driver's licenses or benefits, that sort of thing. There's a lot that can be done at the state and local level. There are quite a few possible solutions out there that could be employed for this. And it's just crucial that they're considered, because if they're not, again, so many of these schools are going to get to this point of no return where they're either just going to have to accept that, hey, our children aren't getting the same education they used to, or they're going to have to drastically increase, the funding that goes into these schools, which means more taxpayer dollars in order to hire the personnel necessary to teach limited English proficient students.
Yeah. And I mean, you'd think all this, pro-immigration administration here, they'd be willing to give some sort of federal dollars to sort of help this idea. I mean, you said it was around, 1%
It's about
of the
1%.
money. Yeah.
And I think we keep seeing it. You had this issue in L.A. where L.A. city council members were caught saying racist things towards blacks and Hispanics. You saw Nancy Pelosi here a couple of weeks ago say, we need illegal aliens in Florida to pick crops. They don't care. These are political pawns for their chess game with the American public. So they don't care if they're getting a good education or not. They just want them more and more migrants to come into the country, hopefully give them citizenship as fast as possible so they vote for their policies so they can fundamentally change the social fabric of the United States, and more importantly, so they have cheap labor for their crony capitalist. That's really what it comes down to, because you would think, based on what you see, the Democratic Party, the mass immigration lobby, what they say on Twitter, what they get in front of the cameras and say, what they accuse us of opposing, you would think that their first response would be, our schools need help? Well, let's redirect money to the schools to make sure that these students are getting what they need. But you never hear that. It's definitely not on the agenda for the teachers' unions in the United States, and you think it would, because that's the biggest teacher shortage in the United States.
I mean, come on, this is all you've been asking for the entire time.
But the catch there is for them to make those funding requests, for them to admit that that's a problem, would be for them to admit that there's a failure of immigration policy on their part, and they're not going to do that. So they're just going to ignore that this problem exists for as long as possible until, they may never acknowledge it. They'll just continue to decrease performance standards. That way you can still say you have high graduation rates and things like that. And it really, again, the ones that suffer most are the children. And it's really a tragedy because they don't deserve this.
Yeah, I mean, they're not getting the proper education that they deserve, that our system is supposed to provide for them right there.
Right.
Is there any way where these schools, I mean, because obviously it doesn't seem like there's any sort of policy, sort of changes which are going to be coming out, which are going to help this situation. Is there any way these schools could try to remedy it on their own? I mean, did you have just one LEP classroom, something along those lines? Would that even help?
Well, I think what we all know is, teachers are some of the most resourceful people that you'll ever meet. They're trying their best to find avenues to make this work. But again, there's ultimately only so much you can do without the proper resources. And so, again, I think the best thing that teachers, students, or school districts can do is to continue to shine a light on this issue, let their state leaders know, let their constituents know, this is the problem, this is what we're up against, this is what we need. Because again, we're seeing that when parents become aware of some of these issues, they react. So many parents during COVID saw some of the stuff that their children were being taught for the first time, when they were watching their classes via Zoom. And if they didn't support it, they got involved. And that's why we see so much. That's why we see education being up at the very nearly the top of issues that voters are concerned about this fall. And so reports like this puts it on the radar for voters. And I think it's important that teachers aren't afraid, that school districts aren't afraid to say, hey, this is a big issue. Because again, if they really want to get into the fight, you could argue that there is standing for these school districts, for these states to actually sue the federal government for the unfunded mandate that they're required. And that, with the strong Supreme Court that we have right now, could lead to at least elements of Plyler v. Doe being overturned potentially. And that would be the first major step in rectifying this issue.
Yeah. Excuse me for not knowing, what's going on judicially completely right now. Is that something that's even being discussed with the judicial branch, or is anyone bringing that up to the Supreme Court?
Well, there are people that are concerned about it, but that's, I think, one of the things that is just kind of maddening, because it just doesn't seem to be on the radar right now. There are no court cases currently being pursued that could lead to the overturning of Plyler. But again, with parents being concerned about education, these are questions that we're seeing being asked. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to update this report when we did, is to get information out there, to give them fuel in this fight. So while it's not occurring right now, that's one of those things that really should be on the agenda going forward, is if the administration isn't going to take it seriously, if most states aren't going to take it seriously, the one avenue where conservatives have found some success in recent years has been in the courts. And so this is an issue that could be taken to the courts again, showing that they have standing due to the fiscal and social costs associated with educating limited English proficient students from the children of illegal aliens and the children of migrants who come here and don't appropriately speak our language. They at least should be able to demonstrate standing to get a suit going, and in the right court system, it could actually progress forward. Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds like really the main basis, the main way that we get this entire thing going is by getting the word out, making sure people know what's going on.
Absolutely.
And that's where you, the listener, could be involved here. Make sure that you're sharing this, when you see the YouTube video, when you see the Rumble video, subscribe to our content. You can listen to us on Spotify, on Google, on Apple Podcasts, all the above. Make sure you're spreading the word. Make sure you're letting people know that this is an issue that our public schools are facing, and it's something that's real. This isn't something we're talking about that's going to be in the future, something that we're going to have to worry about down the line. This is something that's happening right now, and something that we can take action on, and we've laid it all out here in this podcast right now, how exactly we can take that on head on, and how we can make sure we're making some kind of progress here. Well, this has been Understanding Immigration. Spencer, thank you so much for joining me this week. Looking forward to future episodes here, and stay tuned for more. Thank you.